5, 6, 7, 8.
Hi EXers, welcome to the EX podcast episode number 49. This is your host, Stefan Vincent. I'm here today with you because we need to shake things up in the world of HR, talent acquisition, recruiting and company culture in order to create positive employee experiences in our organizations. And your workplace doesn't have to be a dreadful place where employees feel disengaged. This podcast brings a different lens to the HR, employee engagement, and company culture conversation. We approach these topics from a brand and customer experience angle rather than a traditional HR angle. Our guests, all thought leaders and disruptors in the EX space in their own way, come to this show to share best practices on the key elements that foster employee engagements and strengthen company culture, and also to spark the conversation on how to create positive employee experiences. Not every company can do what Airbnb or Google do around their employee experience. And this is what this show is all about. Sharing stories of companies of all sizes, not only to show that EX doesn't require a large budget or large team, but also that there isn't one recipe. Each company can find its own way through the EX journey. Today's guest is David Ducheyne, a former Chief People Officer, now a keynote speaker, author, and advisor. He's also the co-founder and president of HRPro.be, Belgium's first national association of HR professionals. Today with David, we will talk about what trends he's seeing in the HR space in Europe, what he means by saying it's a mistake to focus on the internal customer first. Instead, we should always focus on the external customer first. Who should own the employee experience within a company? What's next for the HR function and for HR professionals? And why HR can't be responsible for employee happiness in any organization. This episode is brought to you by Fusion Alliance. Fusion Alliance delivers holistic solutions fusing together data, digital, and technology to redefine customer experiences and move your ideas to execution. That's why businesses across multiple industries have relied on Fusion's expertise and partnership for over 25 years. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with David. If you get a chance, please make sure to review the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, or YouTube. And last thing, if you want to send me feedback or suggestions for future topics or guests, you can reach me at svincent@exsummit.com or on Twitter at ex_summit. All right, guys, let's get to it. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the EX podcast. Very excited for today's guest, David Ducheyne. David is calling from Brussels in Belgium, and he's a former chief people officer for a large company in Belgium. And now he's a keynote speaker, author, and advisor. David, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So let's lift the veil of mystery and tell us a bit more about who David Ducheyne is and what you do.
Okay, I've started my own business actually a couple of months ago. After 25 years of HR experience in corporations, I worked for Alcatel, for Henkel, Securex, Case New Holland, and so I decided a couple of months ago to start my own business as I don't like to call myself a consultant. I prefer the word advisor. And so I help organizations to develop leadership, to develop their organizational architecture, and to develop people strategies. And this, of course, in the context of strategy execution. So I work currently for organizations in the health care sector, in IT, education, public service, and so on. So I have customers in various areas of business and public life.
You launched HRPO.be, which is Belgium's first national association of HR professionals. And obviously the HR function is being disrupted dramatically, whether it's in Europe or in North America. and HR professionals are expected to think and act differently, more as customer experience or marketing professionals. So what trends are you seeing in the HR space in Europe right now?
Yeah, I launched HR Pro just because there's a big challenge in HR for the future. So what I believe, there's actually two major movements going on. First of all, there's everything which has to do with innovation and disruption. And of course, that's HR analytics and digital and so on. But on the other hand, I see there is a trend to go back to the essence of HR. And the essence of HR for me is that organizations make sure that people are willing and able to perform sustainably. And every word in that sentence is important. This is not new, but we somehow forgot as an HR profession that HR is still about people in the context of a strategy of an organization. It's not digital and analytics that will save maybe we don't need to save HR, but it's not HR analytics and digital that is going to save HR. It's more this return to the essence. If we as an HR profession can become within an organization the experts on everything which has to do with people, then we have an added value. And of course, digital and analytics will help an HR profession to do that, but it's not the essence. So there's the two at the same time.
So when you say go back to what human resources historically was about, what has changed from the early days of HR to why we have to go back to those fundamentals now?
Well, in the 50s and the 60s, we were talking about employees and personnel, and it was personnel management. And then at a certain time, we said as a profession, we have to be more strategic because personnel management is not strategic enough. And then we positioned ourselves as human resources managers. And then we focused on the essence in terms of the active components of humanity in terms of an organization. And I laugh when I say it. It's productivity, it's competencies, it's talent, and so on. And we said, okay, if we can manage those resources, we're going to be of strategic importance. And then after that, we said, well, maybe that's not enough still. Let's talk about human capital. But both human resources and human capital neglected something, and that is that humans in an organization do not come only with their active components, they come as whole people. And so I think, and I'm convinced that as HR, we need to return to a whole person approach, whereas in the past we only looked at what was actually very relevant in the work context. But it's not that someone comes to the work only as an employee or as a freelance, but he brings his whole person with him or her. And that's also about well-being and also problems at home or opportunities at home in private life and so on and so forth. So we have to look at the person as a whole and not as a person as a component in a system.
When we charted to prepare for the show, you mentioned to me that it's a mistake to focus on the internal customer first. Instead, we should always focus on the external customer first. It's an interesting position because now we hear more and more that we should put employees first before customers. So can you expand on your thoughts on this and why we should actually put the external customer first?
If you look at an organization, the relevance of an organization comes from the stakeholders or the people you work for. So customers, clients, citizens, patients, whatever. That's what gives meaningfulness to an organization. That's what makes an organization relevant. And this is the final purpose of any organization. In that context, we have to put people high on the I would say on the agenda, because it's people that will deliver services and products to those customers. And so if you look at the importance of customers, I think we should focus on that. Also, HR should focus on the external customer, but in a time sequence, of course, we have to make sure that the people are willing and able to perform for those customers. But it's always customers. It's always the external relevance of an organization. An organization doesn't exist in itself. So I know that we are talking as an HR professional that we have to treat our employees as customers. I think that's a mistake, because it gives a false perspective. Of course, we have to care and we have to make sure that people feel well and that they are competent and engaged and so on and so forth. But we do this to be able to deliver a service or a product to a customer.
I would agree with the fact that the end goal around the employee engagement and employee experience has to be what impact it has on the business, right? I don't believe in any employee experience initiative that can't be measured on how it's impacting the business, whether it's customer satisfaction, is productivity, it is quality of products, it is how customers actually engage with the brands and relates to the brands. But at the same time, if you don't have engaged employees, all of those other aspects can't be at the top level. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think we're saying the same thing. Of course, we need people who are healthy and competent and engaged to be able to perform whatever it is that we have to perform for a customer. And so that's why the people issue is high on the agenda, and it's very important in terms of strategy execution to make sure that people are able and willing to do whatever is necessary. But if we look too much to the inside and that we say, let's make sure that our people are happy, in itself that is not relevant if it's not serving the purpose of the organization. And so it's an and story. So you have to have both. A couple of weeks ago, I was working with an HR unit of a large company in Belgium, and actually we were debating how can we make sure that the external customer is impacted by what HR does.
Yes.
And on the one hand, it's a very difficult exercise because HR is not used to thinking like that. HR is used to thinking of how can I serve the leaders and the employees of the company, but they are not used of thinking how can I serve as an HR organization the external customer. But what I noticed when we did that is that it was a great experience for that HR unit because they could really decide on what was important in what they did and what was less important. And so they said a couple of the things that we do are obligatory, that's legal, we have to do that, okay. And then we have things that we do which impact immediately the customer experience. And then you have a third category where you say, okay, maybe we should do this, but it's not sure if this is relevant for the external customer and the purpose of the organization. So let's question. Let's think about these activities, make sure that if we do them, if we continue them, that there's a purpose, a relevance for the organization and its customers. And it was a great workshop that we did of 2 days. And they left this workshop with a very good idea on what the purpose was. And they could link a lot of things to what the customer would experience if they improved it or if they did well on a certain activity. And so by linking HR activities and processes to customer experience and so on and so forth, you get this energy in the HR organization that says, okay, indeed what we do is important for this organization and for its customers. And so if you said in the beginning we have to become more like marketing, not sure if I like the phrase, but in any way, what marketing, the core of marketing is the customer focus. And I think that every function, every organization, every employee, every freelancer should have this focus on the external customer. And so whether it is now HR or marketing or even finance, and they have a very tough time in linking their activities to customer activities. They have a really tough time to do that. But even finance should make itself relevant for the external customer. Otherwise, it will become, I know this word turns around finance still, but it will become a commodity.
Right. So we completely on the same page on this. So to go a bit deeper on this topic, focusing on the employee experience and company culture often look more like a cosmetic efforts than a deep identity shift. So how should an organization approach its employee experience to make it more impactful and meaningful than just a band-aid or a cosmetic surgery?
If an organization wants to do a program on experience and engagement and so on and so forth, but they're not willing to grasp the nettle at its roots or to grasp the problem at its roots, then you have an issue because you will not achieve sustainable results with that. If I may make a comparison, it's like, suppose that you're not happy with the way the organization functions. It's like a polluted river. And where do you attack pollution? You don't attack pollution at the end of the problem. That means when the water enters the sea, you can put a filter there and you will swim in the water, but it will be filthy water. But it will look nice because you have put a filter there. Now you have to go to the root and look upstream. Where can we solve the problem? And so in terms of HR, I believe that we have to start with the outcome for the customer. We have to check if the behavior of the people, the way they function, the way they work, is coherent with what we want to deliver to the customers. And we have to check if the context, culture, organization, structure, processes, and so on is coherent with the behavior that we want. And then finally, we have to look at leadership and vision and culture. Is that coherent? And so what I often do with customers is to look for inconsistencies rather than for consistencies. Where is it not consistent with what we want to do? And then you go as high as possible. There's no point in changing people's behavior if you're not willing to give them the tools and the processes that they need to deliver quality to their customer. And it's no point in trying to make people more responsible for what they do, whilst the leaders are still very much into control and into really distrusting people and so on and so forth. So we need to make sure that leadership, context, behavior, and the outcome, the value that we want to deliver for our customers, that is consistent. And if we see some inconsistencies, that are the places where we can improve. And I believe very much in the fact that HR should not only look at the behavioral or the talent part, but also look at the context, the organization part, and the leadership part. And they have to look at it as a kind of value chain. Leadership, contexts, behavior, outcome, it's like a value chain, but it's a people value chain. And so we can really find very simple sometimes solutions to problems, but we cannot only do cosmetics. If we do cosmetics, people will not believe it.
So you worked in large organizations in the past, and you oversaw both customer experience and the HR functions. In your mind, who should own the employee experience within an organization?
For me, it's the collective leadership that should be responsible for that. It's not HR. HR cannot do anything without a leadership team or a leadership culture that really embraces the idea of employee experience. So what HR has to do is make sure that the leaders are able to do that, and that there is a qualitative, high-quality leadership within the organization. So for me, HR is not so much a function, but it's like a process of a people process within an organization, which is carried by the leaders within the organization. In my last company, there were about 220 leaders for 1,600 employees. That means that you have 220 times to confirm your culture, to confirm your people strategy, to confirm your leadership approach. But there's also 220 opportunities to screw up. So that's why I focus so much on leadership and leadership quality in what I do as HR and now as advisor, because there's a lot of problems there, but there are also a lot of solutions on the leadership levels of the value chain. And I think it's crucial to work on that.
Yeah, because it cannot be a siloed effort led by HR or any other function within an organization, because there are so many different stakeholders in the entire employee journey and employee experience. From if you have a marketing or employer brands team to promote the employer brands to potential candidates, to the recruiting team, to HR that does the onboarding and benefit management. But also you have all those different managers in more operational roles that oversee teams, and those have a very important role to play on a day-to-day basis to make sure that the employees are engaged and feel appreciated and motivated in the workplace. So that's what you mean by collaborative effort?
Yeah, it's a collaborative effort. It's a collective effort, and HR should never accept sole responsibility for this. In the past, it wanted to have this responsibility, but it's always been a mission impossible. And I think we should never do that again. If you look at marketing, who's responsible for marketing, I'm very sure that many marketeers believe they are. But if the marketing efforts, which is the branding, which is a promise to the customers, is not confirmed by those behaviors of people, you have an issue too. If you're in retail and you have millions of contact moments with customers, it depends on how people react. And even if it's a digital environment, it's even people who have developed that. So it depends on the people, how you treat your customers. And so marketing is also a collective effort. Service quality is a collective effort. Strategy execution in general is a collective effort. And HR should not claim the field of people within the organization. It should make sure that the people strategy is developed, is done, that there's expertise about how people function, how we can define and design actually systems that help people to perform well and to feel well. And so this is the contribution of HR to an organization, but it's not solely responsible for everything which has to do with people.
So we talked about how the customer experience and the marketing functions have evolved. How do you see the HR function evolve then, and what skills or backgrounds do you see future HR professionals will need?
If we start with the basics will always be expertise, HR expertise, but though that expertise is much larger than it used to be. And we have to add, it's not only the legal stuff or the process stuff, it's also the expertise on behavioral science. It's also the expertise on everything which has to do with conversations and communication. And those are for many HR people, pretty new things. It's also the expertise on change and how people react to change. So there's a part of expertise. But of course, you will always have also legal and comp and ben expertise and talent acquisition expertise.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned behavioral expertise as well. So what's interesting is, I know some HR people who've, let's say, maybe studied psychology and then HR in college. But the psychology aspect to the HR function is different from the behavior knowledge of the human behavior knowledge, right? Especially right now, when you look at how, again, customer experience or marketing functions understand or customer behaviors, it's a lot of data driven, which is not necessarily part of the instruction within psychology in college, right? So do you see more and more HR professionals at least have some sort of knowledge of people analytics?
I think that statistics or analytics are very important. Psychology is usually very statistics driven and data driven. The problem is that in many companies, maybe only in the big companies, but in many companies you don't have too much big data or data from which you can make conclusions. Mm-hmm. So that's an issue. But I always say you have to look for data. And that's the second thing. We talked about the roles, I talked about the expertise, and the second is really also this data, evidence-based strategic orientation, because the steering of the HR function should come much more from data, from proof than it's today the case. So that's a second role or second area where HR has to develop. A third one is coaching of leaders. This is not entirely new, but we should become better at it. And we should be really close to the CEO and the executives of the organization. And we have to coach them. And we have to make sure that there's a top-down cultural development. Culture doesn't trickle up, it trickles down. So we have to, as HR, we are able to coach people and leaders on what it is to work with people, to develop cultures, teams, and so on and so forth. So coaching is an essential part of it. And then the fourth part is architecture. We have to become much better in design thinking and in organizational design, and make sure that we not only have anecdotal interventions, but that we also build structural accumulative solutions to certain issues, and that we make sure that the organization develops itself according to the needs, the changes, the disruptions, and so on and so forth. So we become experts in architecture, and that can range from autonomous teams, Scrum, Agile, whatever. We have to really focus on the organization there. And I don't mean organizational structure. It's only a small part of it. It's also about how do you develop cultures, how do you make sure that people cooperate, and so on and so forth.
So what is the place to train HR professionals, especially on people data and analytics or design thinking? Mentoring, I could say that has been part of HR for quite some time, yeah. But design thinking is very new to the HR function as well as people analytics. So is it something that should be taught in school, or is it something that should be taught later on within each organization to make sure that the HR people that are hired by the organization can be trained on those? Because if you go back to the college or university level, that's a drastic shift in terms of education.
I would certainly plead for integrating design thinking in education, be it university or even secondary school, high school. Design thinking is a way of thinking in which you solve problems. It's a way of problem solving using human collective wisdom, very human-centric, And also, it's an approach that helps you tackle problems in a sustainable way. In the past, we made a lot of mistakes in organizations where we developed solutions for problems, but we did it with a kind of, I would say, logical, analytical, rational approach. And design thinking helps to integrate many views, many issues, many approaches in one solution, implementing it carefully, sustainably, and it helps really to take steps forward, but not leaps. You don't have to do big bangs, but design thinking really makes you think in improving certain situations in a much more sustainable way. It's like I was in London last week, and I was really admiring again how the London tube is functioning. It is designed to make sure that there is maximum efficiency, that people do not get lost, that flows of people are well managed, and so on and so forth. It's a brilliant example of influencing behavior, but with a lot of infrastructure, of course, but also with science and communications and helpful people that are there to help you if you're lost, and so on. It's really a system that is designed to make sure that people behave in a certain way. And that's design thinking effort, even if it's been existing for years, for more than 100 years. But it's really a system that has been made more perfect than before. If you go to the Paris subway, you see that they still have some work to do.
No kidding.
But in organizations, it's the same. In organizations, you can think of how are we going to solve the issue that people do not know what is expected from them, that they are maybe not aware of the impact of their behavior on the customer. How can we make sure that organizational departments, structures work together? And we see that today there are much more silo functioning, and so we have to find ways of improving that. And I believe very much, and I see that, and I use that. Design thinking helps very much. It's not a miracle solution. It's hard work, but we have to really embrace that kind of thinking.
All right. So let me ask you that next question then. You said that HR can't be responsible for employee happiness in an organization. What do you mean by that?
Well, the first thing is that HR cannot do it alone and has to depend on the leaders. But now you've used the word happiness, which is a trigger to me. I think it's a mistake for any organization, so for any HR department as well, or HR function as well, to feel responsible for someone's happiness. It's not that happiness is not important, but happiness is something that is so individual and so depending on so many factors that you cannot feel responsible for someone else's happiness. I often give the comparison about happiness, and suppose I would come to my house and I would say to my wife, and I would like you to be happy, I say to my wife. And so she will have tears in her eyes and say, yeah, why do you say that? That's so sweet. And then I say, well, I want you to be happy because I know that when you are happy, you cook better for me. I would deserve a slap in the face. So what happens if you say to an employee, I want you to be happy because I think you will be more productive? No, I want you to be happy because I'm a human being and I care for people and I want you to be happy, but I cannot make you happy and I cannot be responsible for your happiness because you will do things in your life that make you unhappy. And I, as an organization, will do things that make you unhappy because I have to, in terms of restructuring or organization or systems or whatever. And you may be unhappy because of what the organization does. Does that mean that I cannot do it anymore because you will be unhappy? So let's not take happiness as outcome of HR. Let's not do that.
So what do you make of those people who claim being a chief happiness officers in organizations?
I have had discussions with them. I said, okay, I understand that you want to do well for people, but you cannot be responsible for the happiness. So I am responsible as an HR, or I was responsible for the people aspect in an organization. And when I say, okay, I want people to be willing and able to perform sustainably, the word sustainably is important, because sustainably means that I cannot do anything that will make people incompetent or miserable, and so on and so forth. So yes, I contribute to happiness as an HR, but I'm not responsible for it. And sometimes I contribute to unhappiness because I have to, because the organization requires, because it's something I need to do to be able to serve the customer. Once I came into an organization, and the first thing the people said, the union said to me, we are unhappy. And I said, I don't care. And they were shocked. And they thought they had a monster as new HR director. And I said, well, I don't care about your happiness in the sense that I don't feel responsible for it. What I do want to do is make sure that you have a job that gives you perspective, that makes you employable, that in which you can be autonomous and you can engage. And maybe that will make you happy, or that will contribute to your happiness. But I don't want to feel responsible for happiness. If I would start doing that, people would scrutinize my actions in terms of happiness. Does that contribute to happiness or not? And if you are happy in an organization, that's fine. But be aware of the fact that if you're happy or satisfied in the organization, that you will be very reluctant to embrace change, because the change might make you unhappy again. So happy people, satisfied people, try to protect that what gives them happiness or satisfaction. And that means that this is sometimes a force of inertia. But don't say that I said that I want people to be unhappy. Not at all. On the contrary. But I cannot be responsible for it.
Watching at what's happening in Europe from North America, it looks like Europe is leading the charge in terms of redefining what the employee experience, or defining what the employee experience should be in organizations. Do you see that as well? And what is it? Why is it the difference? Why is it Europe leading the way? Is it a cultural thing? Is it a societal thing? What do you think?
I see the topic of experience on both sides of the Atlantic. I think that in Europe there is a tradition of caring for employees, and that's embedded in a lot of social security systems and measures and so on. I think a lot of organizations have lost that caring aspect. But if you say that Europe is leading in this field, I think it's really a part of what has been there a lot of times, or during a lot of time within Europe. In Germany, you had at a certain time in German the Rhineland model, which is the Rhineland model, which said, okay, an organization has to, I would say, combine or unite all stakeholders of an organization. And that's not only the shareholders or the customers, but also the employees and the partners and the suppliers. And we have to do good for everyone. And so it's the idea of balance. I think that's an important idea of balance. And maybe the northern, or maybe the Anglo-Saxon model is much more focused only on shareholder value. I think there's a difference there. Whereas you know very well that the idea of shareholder value and maximizing shareholder value has crossed the ocean, and a lot of organizations have embraced that idea, which is sometimes a very short-term thinking idea. It shouldn't be, but it's very often very short-term thinking. And if you talk about people, and you cannot be very short-term thinking for many reasons. You have a relationship with people, it cannot be short-term. You have a culture which is never short-term. You cannot develop it on short-term. So you have to really invest in people. And so the quarterly thinking, every 3 months you have to deliver, is detrimental for a long-term thinking, and therefore also for employee experience. It's very detrimental. And maybe in Europe we have been a bit less radical in the short-term quarterly thinking. But maybe it's only a wish of my side that it's like that.
So we're getting close to the end of our conversation today. So let me ask you a few fun questions before we wrap it up for the day. What was your dream job when you grew up as a kid?
I wanted to become an inventor. But I haven't become, I'm not that. I'm creative, but not an inventor.
In what fields as an inventor?
Well, I remember that I listened to a radio station in Lille. I lived in Bruges, and it was very far away, and my radio couldn't capture it. So I invented a antenna, and I used parts that I found to be able to capture that radio. So I was quite technical at the time. And I always was looking at technology and so on and so forth. But at the end, I did psychology.
Did the antenna work?
Yeah, it did. I could capture radio Metropolis very well. And it worked very well.
That's good. That's a fun story. What is your favorite vacation spot or destination?
I'd say the mountains of Austria. I like mountains a lot. I like climbing them, but it's more like hiking in the mountains. It's not alpinism. So reaching a destination in the mountains is not so important. Okay, you have to, but it's really the way up that's so fantastic of doing. So I would say Austrian Alps.
So let's say when you go to the Austrian Alps, what is the essential item that you always take with you?
Good shoes and good socks.
Okay, yeah, those are important when you go hiking, that's for sure.
Yeah.
What is your favorite food?
It's a difficult question because I like eating. So I would say that it's a difficult question. I would say give me a steak, which is very well baked, not well done, but for me steak has to be bloody, saignant, and so give me that and I will be happy.
Okay. If you were the last man on earth, what would you do?
Probably kill myself because I like to be lonely. I would probably make a beacon, like a shrine or something, to make sure that humanity is remembered, and that I'm sure but with some significance. So some last construction on Earth before I die, before humanity dies.
Okay. What is the way for our listeners to follow you on social media?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn and on Twitter, on Facebook. So if you just search David Ducheyne, you will find me on all those media. And I'm happy to interact on social media.
Any last word of wisdom or advice before we conclude this conversation?
Everything I've learned through mistakes and trial and error. So I cannot claim to have much wisdom on experience.
That's a good one, actually. I like it. All right. Well, thank you so much, David, for being with us today and sharing some insights from a European perspective to the company culture, employee experience, and the HR function and where the HR world is going. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the EX Podcast. If you want to learn more, visit our website at expodcast.com. If you want to find out more about our next conferences, go to exsummit.com. Finally, you can also find my manifesto on business to employee or B2E branding at b2ebranding.co. See you next week.